slip out the back. Should've had the guts, but you lacked the knack. Now we're left with a game that's nothing but whack. And you've got your getaway in a Cadillac. Hey, hey, skip down when the chip's down. Board the train, you've lost your fame. You're stranded here, loyalty's long gone. You're just spinning in the eye of the storm. The floor's on fire, jump from the pot as the flames get higher, higher and higher. Refuse to fix the mess, gonna keep the regret, the regret, the regret. Baby, the floor's on fire, jump from the pot as the flames get higher, higher and higher. The floor's on fire, jump from the pot as the flames get higher, higher and higher.
How did they do that? How did they manage to waste $400 million on this? How? We've got Learning the Law here, and he pretty much encapsulates the situation that Firewalk finds themselves into today. That's the studio that developed Concord. It says the Concord director walks into a room of investors and says, "We finally know what the audience wants. Live service games, pronouns, diverse body-positive characters, and aliens. We only need about $400 million, that's all." And an investor replies with, "Well, I only know golf, but okay, what's the worst that could happen?" Well, as you know, and here's a little review for people who might not know somehow, PlayStation cut the cord on Concord, or Concord if you prefer. I know it's a dad joke, but Concord, huh? Yeah, that should be on the merch, right? Not that Concord merch that's for sale in the PlayStation store, inexplicably. Anyway, so after just 13 days of this game being live and only 668 people logging in to play it, PlayStation decided this isn't worth it and pulled the plug on it. We only found out around that time that we also had one of their devs by the name of, I forgot his name just now, hold on, Xander Farrell. Very normal name there. And he wrote on Twitter, in a fight with a bunch of people about the game, he says, "Why would I care about a bunch of talentless freaks hating on Concord?" Well, now today we find out from Colin Moriarty, okay? Now, you might remember him from the PS I Love You podcast, XOXO there, that was part of the title. This was that sort of trivia, extensive knowledge, deep dive exploration of PlayStation lore. Not anything in general particular, but more over the greater conversation about PlayStation. Even executives from Japan found their way into the studio there to record an episode with Colin. So it's not like something that this guy just fell from the sky and all of a sudden he's got the deets. But he's got a video here where he's discussing with a couple of other gentlemen on his channel, Sacred Symbols. Feel free to follow him over there, by the way. It's at Long Island Viper over on Twitter, okay? Looking for Colin Moriarty as the handle, but the screen name is Long Island Viper. Make sure you check that out because, again, this is where this information comes from, and I'm only here to discuss it with you, okay? That's all. So I'm going to pause through this in order to add some context and commentary to it because this is a really important conversation to have. This is what $400 million went to. Consider for a minute, let's just think about this. Someone pulling on your heartstrings. $400 million could have gone to an orphanage. $400 million could have gone to a school. $400 million could have gone out there to make sure that folks are being fed rather than having to resort to other methods, if you will. And so here we find ourselves now, right? Here we find ourselves now finding out that 400 million US smackaroonies found their way into Concord, inexplicably, by the way, because this game does not look like anything that should have cost $400 million. It honestly looks like a Chinese reskin bootleg of Overwatch. I don't know how, as you saw in the opening, you saw in the gameplay footage, how is that then even distinguishable from an average Valorant match? It's got a little bit of like Overwatch aesthetic to it, but that's just Valorant, dude. That's just Valorant. People running around, throwing smoke grenades, running through glowy mushroom fields with regular old sniper rifles. It's a bizarre aesthetic choice. Thor over at Pirate, I want to say it's Pirate Software. Thor, the guy that came from Blizzard, and he's sort of the motivational fellow for coders right now. Real neat guy. Please check him out. He's a ferret aficionado, by the way. But even he commented that when you're designing characters, it's not so much that you want to go make like a Master Chief ripoff or anything that was already established and looks cool and you just add like a color variant to it. What you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to evoke like who this character is as soon as you look at them. It's kind of like you and me walking around with our own personal fashion. I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, I went to Hot Topic. I was one of those kids with the big wide twill pants. You remember those? All the belts on, you're just a walking rave. All you needed was like dangling glowing glow sticks and stuff like that, and the power goes out and you're your own personal rave, you know? Back when Bluetooth speakers still were kind of like iffy, you know, if you turned them the wrong way, they'd lose connection with your QWERTY keyboard phone. They had the fold-out phone. Yeah, I'm that old. Yeah, I'm that old. Not Sony Walkman old, but like old enough to remember QWERTY keyboards that slid out from underneath your phone, and that was clever. But anyway, back to this mess, okay? Speaking of wastes of time.
I want to talk about Concord. I wasn't going to ever talk about this game again. Because who really gives a shit?
Well, apparently a lot of people do, okay? A lot of people do, because this is a learning moment, all right? I'm sorry to interrupt so quick into this, but this reminded me of what I wanted to say. This is a learning moment. You remember how the SJWs, the leftists, the DEI enthusiasts like to use that line? This is a teaching moment. Be better. This is exactly what this is. Concord is alive in the market, you know, caught in a tall grass style Pokemon that we just found here. It's never been seen before, the Missingo, if you will, the glitch in the system. And so this is a teaching moment for anybody that wants to make games. It's obvious what went wrong market-wise, but now Colin's going to explain the guts of it.
However, and I don't do journalism really anymore, as you guys know, and we talk about this a lot. I was a journalist at one time, and I used to break a lot of stories, and these days I don't really grind like that. So the stories that I break these days are usually people, always, not usually, always people coming to me. And someone who worked on Concord reached out to me, and I verified who this person was and went through all of that and talked to this person extensively, for a long time. Ooh. And got some, I think, interesting information that I can share about Concord. I think people will be interested about it. The reason that I wanted to talk about it is because some of the assumptions that I had made about the game were dead wrong.
All right. So what we need to understand is, like, as Amanda, the character designer, I've forgotten her last name now, I'm very sorry. Just Amanda, the character designer, again, in the previous video about Concord. Amanda was explaining how the executives, the higher-ups, and there were a lot of people that were sort of stomping down on any creative freedom. Now, we went and looked at her art station and her own sort of redesign, upgrade, personalized version of Rey and Asuka from Evangelion. That's how you say it. You don't say it the other way. It's not Evangelion. It's Evangelion, all right? Get with it. Anyway, back at the plot. So we saw her designs, and we understood that even if she was allowed to have full reign, it would still be pretty rough for Concord. At the core of the problem was that they weren't out there to, you'll find out from Colin. Here we go.
As far as how much it cost and how much Sony really lost on it. So the big thing that you really need to know here about this is that Concord cost about $400 million to make.
Oh my God.
And
that is the appropriate reaction, by the way. Oh my God. That's really a very appropriate reaction to finding out a game like that, a hero shooter, an arena hero shooter, a incredibly cliche, very well stomped down, so much so that Halo did it. You know, you got Halo Infinite out there. Even Gundam did it for a little while, didn't they? They had a Gundam arena shooter for a while there, didn't they? So yeah, very well tromped down gaming style here, and somehow it cost $400 million to make.
The story goes that Concord, by the time Concord was, so in the first quarter of 2023, Concord had basically entered an alpha state. This was before Sony had even purchased the team, but Sony had been working with Probably Monsters, and which was the original owner of Firewalk and Firewalk, probably since late 2020, maybe 2021 at the latest on Concord. The game was in development before that.
Okay. And as we know, Sony did step in and purchase this. This, again, so this was not Sony setting out and saying, hey, guys who used to work for Bungie, That's right. That's who Probability Monsters again, and then turned around and gave birth to Firewalk. These are Bungie, Destiny 2 developers that broke away and decided to create their own studio and sub studios from there. And so Probability Monsters had created Firewalk with the expressed purpose of sort of, for lack of a better term, cloning the popular dude bro games. So like your COD, your Overwatch, your Valorant, your um, Apex Legends, these kind of games that for Fortnite. That's right. I'll spit it out eventually. Fortnite. So kind of these kind of clone these games, not specifically all in one like Concord, but it was set out to sort of that was its specific target. It's not going to be over here making Mario clones, if you will. The idea is to take what worked and then combine it with a new aesthetic and a different sort of plot approach where you had global guardians for Overwatch, and in Valorant you're dealing with multiple forces combining their force together. You now have space free gunners, what would be effectively the cowboys in Cowboy Bebop, the bounty hunters, a group of people that have pooled their resources together and abilities together in order to form a functional unit to keep themselves fed and traveling rather than stationary somewhere languishing. And so that's what this story behind Concord is. You saw a couple pieces of it in the beginning there with the opening there that I created. By the way, that song will be available on Bounding Radio. Check the playlist for it. It's a tab right here on the channel. But back to Concord, and I just want to make this point clear about the plot, all right? Because I don't know if Colin gets into this a little later. I didn't pre-watch this because I wanted to react with you on it. I don't want to be out here like pre-knowledging all of this like Professor X or something. So what I got into with this is that Concord's story was basically meant to be a space drifter, like discovers this sort of win a chance to have your I don't know, some sort of special thing happen. It's not abundantly clear what the signal that they're following is meant to mean to them because this is I guess supposed to be revealed later on, sort of like how Overwatch's stuff came out. And that just didn't happen because it didn't live long enough for a second installment.
Up to the point that the game went into alpha state, they had already spent about $200 million on it.
$200 million before alpha. Okay? All right, like, so just pause for a minute and consider for, like, alpha isn't necessarily ready for the shelf, but it's, like, just there. There's a few more things to iron out with it before you go ahead and send it out into what needed to happen. Now, I assume what ate up most of the time after that was, production on advertising materials.
And it's unclear how much of that money is from Probably Monsters and the original investors into the game and how much of that money was from Sony. There's this term in product development, not only with games, but really with everything. You can like manufacture a tchotchke. You guys might have heard of it. It's called minimum viability or a minimum viable product. Mm-hmm. The idea behind this, or MVP, the idea behind this is that this is like what you're trying to achieve. And it's like once you cross this barrier, you feel comfortable selling it. It's not that it's the best it can be or that it's what it's going to be by the time you launch it, because there's all sorts of extra stuff you do to it. But like, this is the minimum viability.
All right, so if anybody's familiar with like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of the other ones, Zoop, I think is one of them, one of the crowdfunding groups out there, websites you can go to. The MVP, the minimum viable product, is usually what gets put up for funding up there, and then like a final prototype is produced or a final product is produced out of that. Just so you can get an idea of what they're talking about in a more hands-on kind of way, because again, they're talking abstract shop talk for insiders that live inside of the dev world. So I'm just providing a little context on that.
Of the product. When the game had already had $200 million spent on it and was basically in an alpha form in quarter one of 2023, from that point until the game launched, Sony spent another $200 million on it.
Oh my gosh, why? Why would... Ugh.
The scuttlebutt behind the scenes about Concord is that the game was in a laughable shape. when it was shown, and basically like when the alpha was ready to go, and they were kind of being like, we're ready to kind of get moving towards getting this thing out in the next year or two. It was in such horrible shape that Sony felt like they needed to spend that much money again. So, 200 plus 200 to get the game to the MVP status, not to the status of it being like a great game, to get it to just viability. And that at that time in Q1 2023, there was nothing done.
Okay, so the reason why I was kind of gentle with Concord about this, because again, there's plenty of stuff you could take pot shots at with it, right? It's real easy targets as far as how the game looks, the way it was marketed, and of course the people involved are a little, hey, you know what I mean? So anyway, I was kind of gentle with it because the gameplay footage that I was seeing by streamers and by paid advertisements through like Wildcat, H2O Delirious, Vanoss, Terrorizer, these guys, it looked pretty smooth. The gameplay, the functionality of the game looked pretty smooth. I mean, in the original Overwatch, it was always a bit of an iffy chance if the FPS was going to crap itself when an explosion went off. You get a smoke cloud that just stays there forever. The whole match, you're just stuck with that there forever. There were a few hiccups with the live service issues. There were a few things where you'd lose half your team occasionally. Not that they'd log out, it just for whatever reason, they just boop, no more. They're done. They're logged out of the match. They're back into the lobby waiting for a new team. That was early. It was early with that. So what he's telling us is that Concord was worse off than that. That when Sony took over this project, they walked in on a flaming dumpster fire and decided to put 200 million more. I thought it was advertising. You just heard me. I thought it was advertising. Meanwhile, it's actually the functionality of the game. No wonder it looks so good. It has the GDP of an Eastern European nation involved in it.
Like, a major expense was having to urgently outsource much of the game to other studios to finish building the game out.
They were so incompetent, they needed another studio, more studios. You didn't even say just one other, just other studios to come in and fix this. That is amazing. That is amazing that they managed to put together a whole... There's 100 and some odd 20 people that work in this studio.
And that two fundamental things were not worked on at all up to the point in which the game was shown in alpha. Onboarding, nothing about that. No, like there was nothing about how players get on, like how they make their character, all that kind of stuff, or, choose their character and get there. And monetization. Two very expensive, very specific and boutique things that happen to games like this. And so that's the first thing that I wanted to say is that.
So what he's talking about here, when you hear about onboarding and you hear about the monetization, it's kind of obvious, but I do want to make it clear to some people who may not be familiar with what exactly he's talking about. Concord didn't have a character creation style, right? There's no way to go in there and like choose your own guide, hit random, and have this really weird looking character like you do in, say, Pal World, for instance. You can make your character look monstrous in that game. In Concord, you had preset characters to choose from, much like you have in Valorant and Overwatch. Pay no mind. But anyway, these guys didn't think about like, hey, is that going to hold people? Is that going to be interesting? Is that going to be fun? They just sat down and they were like, this is interesting to us. We don't care. Again, we keep hearing more and more about these people being in their own bubble. Now, the next thing, why are you making this game if you don't have the intention of monetizing it? It's great to sell an initial copy. Fantastic. Great job. But it's a live service game, Jose. It's a live service game, Jimmy. It's a live service game, Amanda. Come on. Get with it. What are you doing? Think this through for a minute. Just sit with that. That a $400 million game, and nobody had thought, how do we recuperate the cost from that after the launch? Keep in mind, Colin's about to tell you a little bit more about this that I didn't think about, okay? This blew me away.
That it's not only about the ongoing cost, which would be in the millions to keep the game going per month, but that the game cost about $400 million to make, soup to nuts. Sony put most of that money in, and it is not only so, because we had kind of said like this must be Sony's biggest loss ever on a game, and it is.
This means something because Colin knows. Colin knows the nuts and bolts of PlayStation, Sony, like no one else. Even Sony staff members, as I said, have been Japanese ones, have been on his show to discuss the guts of their corporation. Okay, so just please bear in mind that when he says this, it is the truth. Okay, he knows what he's talking about when it comes to PlayStation.
It's the biggest game Sony's ever released from a budgetary standpoint from the first party or second party. So let that sink in.
It's crazy.
And it's totally unintuitive. There are games that are in development right now at Sony first and second party that are more expensive than this. But as of the games that have come out so far, so think about like Spider-Man 2 and so on and so forth. We know The Last of Us Part 2 cost $220 million. Spider-Man.
Okay, Spider-Man. All right, Sony doesn't just get that, okay? I just want to make that abundantly clear. That doesn't just show up on their doorstep like an orphan abandoned, right? That's not, it's a licensing thing they got to pay for. Disney didn't just drop that off and say, okay, guys, good luck. They had to pay for that. There had to be legal contracts, restrictions, limitations, and there had to be representatives of Disney that were present either at the showing of the game or the initial alpha to verify that everything had followed their specific orders and designs. And all this other stuff, and we saw what a travesty Spider-Man games have turned into. However, that aside, with all the MCU stuff that they have to pay for just to get in to start coding this, it still costs about a little over half of what Concord did as an indie up creation. Nothing pre-registered, no previous existing licensing.
Spider-Man 3 is going to cost about $350 million. This game costs more than that. And they lost all of it because they made no money. They made about $1 million gross revenue, and then they gave it all back. So this is a huge, multiple hundreds of millions of dollar loss. Now, the question is, why? Why did this happen? This game was heavily championed behind the scenes. Now, we know this because Sony ended up, what's funny is that the game is presented in Q1 2023 as this, we're kind of getting towards the end. The game is nowhere near being done. It's in a horrible position. And then Sony buys the team.
Okay, so you ever hear of a fixer-upper? You hear about this? Maybe your parents watch this. I used to watch the House Flippers. It's just fun to me to see like these beat-up houses get turned into something fancy and then sold off to these people that sell umbrellas for millions of dollars or something. I don't know. But either way, that's what he's dealing with here. So Sony bought Concord, bought Firewalk and Concord as a fixer-upper. They did not come into this with something that was like, yeah, we got to have it because it looks really good. They were thinking they were going to come in and create something that was going to go pretty far.
The idea behind this was, and the term apparently verbatim had been used, that Concord is the future of PlayStation.
How many times have we heard that, huh? The future of Ford, the Ford Probe, the future of Ford, right? The Dodge Neon, the future of Dodge, the Mac Lisa, the future of Macintosh. How many times have we heard that, huh? How many times have we heard we're going to go back to the moon? How many times have we heard that we're going to take us off the dollar and switch to a brand new currency that isn't devaluable? Yeah, how about that? Devaluable's a word now, right? I just made it up. I don't care if it's real or not. I'm deciding it's not real and it is real now.
That they had such major ambition for this game that it was referred to internally as a Star Wars-like project for Sony. That it can be repeatedly revisited over and over and over again, not only in cross-media, but in what we were seeing. We've already kind of seen little bits of it. So
yeah, we heard that right. They thought it was Star Wars. They thought they had made woke space Star Wars. Consider for a minute just where that initial thought may have gotten started, right? Somewhere in the guts of Sony or somewhere in the guts of Firewalk, they just walked out of the office one day, took a breath of fresh air and said, we're making the new Star Wars. Somebody out there is going to think of unwed Asian auntie and say, man, that's like Darth Vader to me. That's like a Darth Vader character. They're going to think about walking septic tank and think to themselves, man, that was like R2-D2, but with some hey smeared on the top. That's going to get clipped. I know it is.
The weekly story vignettes that they were going to release. And then, of course, the inclusion in Amazon's secret levels anthology, that's like just scratching the surface of it. Ironically, the game was codenamed Chaos behind the scenes. And a major thing about the game is that there was, and I think we can kind of get this vibe from just the nature of the people making it and kind of the way the game reads and all that, a toxic positivity vibe.
Now, that's an interesting phrase. I haven't heard toxic positivity yet, okay? This was new to me when I discovered some of the replies to this. Down below, there's a few replies. I don't want to lose our place because X is a little finicky sometimes with video, as you know. But it is toxic positivity. You've heard toxic masculinity now. How about toxic positivity, where you're going out and reinforcing bad behaviors out of humans? Take, for instance, obesity. Nobody, at least in the United States, is really running around with a perfect BMI, right? So let's not worry about that. I think it's BMI, body mass index. Yeah. So nobody's walking around with like an but there might be a few, okay? Don't get me wrong. There are people obsessed with maintaining that. But by and large, the general American populace is just a little bit overweight. There's a little jiggle to the wiggle, right? But here we go with people who are full-blown obese. And this is like Daw, that big character, Muncha Luncha. You see him over in a design video I did on this, again, linked at the end. But you see Muncha Luncha there. And so that character is meant to be like fat positive, all right? That just as a flaming example, there's plenty of other ones here, but just as a flaming, bright, like blinding example of what this toxic positivity looks like. It's reinforcing bad behaviors in humans through either media or discussion or however you'd like to convey it, smoke signals, who knows. But it is the reinforcement of bad behaviors, these destructive behaviors in people.
You weren't allowed to say anything, apparently internally, about this game. About how like something's wrong with it, character designs are not right, and so on and so forth. They really, truly believe this was Herman Hulst's baby, apparently. And he internally was himself a massive champion of the game. So it's not that. So the reason I'm telling you all of this, it's some interesting information, of course, but it's that I had said when people were like, Concord lost $200 million. Now people were pulling that money out because that's basically how much like some of the first party games like Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us Part 2, etc., kind of cost in that frame. And I was like, there's no way that it cost that much.
It cost more than the Ghost of Tsushima. I got corrected in the comments on how to pronounce that, but it cost more than the Ghost of Tsushima. You've seen that game. It's beautiful. It's wonderfully rendered. It's very engaging. The story is, again, something that he's referencing it for a reason. It's a very popular game, well-received and championed. But this game cost more than that.
I was saying like it cost 9 figures, probably like low $100 million, but there's no way it cost $200 million. No, it cost $400 million. So, and I am totally solid on this source, by the way. So that's why I'm willing to share it with you. Because again, I'm not really a journalist. So yeah, the big things to take away: $400 million loss. The game was in horrible shape as of 18 months ago before release. Not even monetization, no onboarding, most content not even there. The game was in such bad shape at that point that they spent the budget of it again in urgent outsourcing to get the game finished from all of these different angles over an 18-month period. Internally, the game was considered part of the future of PlayStation with heavy cross-media references and a system of toxic positivity surrounding it that didn't allow anyone to meaningfully change the course of the game. Because if the people at the top truly believe in something, right, you're not going to be able to do much about that. I don't.
So again, we had Amanda, and she explained that her bosses were telling her that these designs are the ones they're going to stay with forever. Okay? Now, I don't take back what I said about Amanda. Again, this is before Sony found this game. They had the designs. They had most of its functionality. He's telling us that it didn't... it was a little iffy there for a minute. It was a little iffy. But what happened is that they decided this. They stayed on it. After Sony came in, they like ratcheted down on conversation about what this game looks like and spent $200 million reinforcing that, okay? So consider, rather than admonishing and forgiving Amanda on this, stay with me on this, okay? Amanda was a character designer for all these characters, and when this was made known to her that she cannot question these things, it was time to go. All right, it was time to leave. It was time to go out and explain this kind of stuff because again, we're not living in an era where it's hard to get hired by the devs, at least not before this year. It was hard to get hired by game studios. They've been sucking them up since 2020, well, 2019. Been sucking them up left and right. Again, not hard to find a job until this year. And part of why that is because Concord contributed to how the market's been toxified, if you will. And so this is what Colin was explaining, is that these people didn't have a decision making in the process, but I retain to you that if you're the design leader, you're the lead designer in this, okay? I retain to you that you cannot be someone that is pushed around in this scenario. What's that look like on your resume? Like, Amanda, consider for a minute that taking orders is now something that's forever branded to your forehead. That's forever. You're going to end up having to explain to every person that hires you going forward what happened with Concord because it's just such a bizarre story. And there's so much mystique floating around it. And you being a person at the guts of it, Amanda, you're going to end up explaining it everywhere you go. This is why I'm telling people, like, if you're watching this and you're somebody that's trapped in a studio, get out. Get out. Okay? I know you want to make games. I know you want to be like, I work for X company. And I don't know if that's a name for a game company, but you know what I mean. I work for, I can't even say blank because they're clever like that. Anyway, you want to say that you work for a prestigious gaming studio, right? Well, that's really great. But the problem is that those don't exist anymore. Your nostalgia tells you they do, but they don't exist anymore. We see this with Ubisoft. We see this with EA. We see it with Sony now. It's very obvious with Sony now. It's like you could ignore it before, but now you really can't ignore it. Across the board, Konami, Capcom, even the great Nintendo, at least the American end of it, is getting twisted. So think about this. Are you really going to want a Concord on your resume for the rest of your life that you have to explain the ins and outs of all the drama that happened anytime somebody reviews your resume? Do you really want that? Do you really want to be able to brag that you worked for a Bungie 2-layer down subsidiary studio? Was that really important to you, Amanda? Because apparently it was important to Ryan Ellis, who has now walked away from Firewalk Studios. That's right, Ryan Ellis, the guy that was the director of the game. You remember him. He came out and told us that the game was going to continue functioning. We'll get into that quote in a minute. But we need to get back up here to this quote right here. Now, this comes from Kotaku's Ethan Gach. So please remember that even Kotaku has some solid sources. I mean, I guess you'd go to a friendly, right? You're not going to go to a hostile source like boundingintocomics.com that has been critical of the game since it first surfaced for information our audience was interested in. You're going to go to a friendly service, a friendly space like Kotaku, a safe space, if you will. And so according to the sources that came to Ethan, it says that the bell began to toll for Firewalk Studios when Concord director Ryan Ellis, who per Gatch was the main shot caller on the failed hero shooter. He told his fellow devs he would be stepping down from leadership role in favor of a more support-oriented one. So he's not leaving the studio entirely, he's just stepped out of the way of being a director. Now, for me, I know what this means. He actually has stepped out of the way, but stepped away from the studio. It's not going to happen. Because later on, we find out this, okay? So now we find out that after Ryan said they were going to find other ways to get Concord out, that they were going to maybe make it a free-to-play thing was theorized about this, that they were going to maybe reskin the game. No. At the end of the day, what's actually happening is they're probably going to fire people. So according to Ethan's inside source, they're telling Ethan, saying they, being the Firewalk studio heads, are saying they are pessimistic Concord will return and seem to have asked to explore pitches for something completely different, which is the studio, by the way, which is currently employing 150 to 170 employees. All right, so I had it wrong earlier when I said it was 120. It's way more than that. So out of 170 people, You couldn't get a game ready for Sony's standards of preparation. They needed to put 200 million extra on top of the 200 million already invested in this game. Amazing. Speculation among some of the staff also included whether the studio could be used as a co-development in one of Sony's myriad of other first-party projects currently in production. Others, however, feel like mass layoffs and the shutdown of Firewalk is on the horizon. Oh no, who would have ever have predicted that, right? But this is where we find ourselves now. As I said earlier, Concord is a game that's going to live in infamy because it's a teachable lesson. It will be studied, dissected, redissected, reanalyzed, remastered through that reanalyzation. Somebody may even end up breaching the code and getting the game entirely and being able to explore all the stupid things that were inside of it. So again, we're probably just at the edge of the information that's going to come out of Firewalk about what actually went on in here. And according to Colin, Sony came in and liked all of the woke. They liked all of that woke. They liked all of the DEI. They liked all of the crazy character designs, as you saw in the other video with the renames I put on them, okay? Now, again, at the top of this, I said we were going to talk about what we could do with this game. So, in my opinion, I think we could reskin it, and you could reissue it, Firewalk, as a Bionicle game. Consider reaching out to the Maori, right? The people who were aggrieved originally with Lego's like wholesale theft of their culture and just put into their Mata Nui series, right? So rather than doing that way, go to the Maori people and ask for their advice. Ask to bring in Maori devs if you want to. Make this like the full outreach program you intended to try and do with Concord initially, right? You've already spent $400 million. You might as well put a product people can rely on behind it. Bionicle's been off the shelves for quite a while, and people have nostalgia fever for it. And a younger generation probably has never seen these things in action, considering most of the footage was stored on mini discs that aren't so compatible with modern disk drives. So consider for a minute that Bionicle might be the way forward. Might be interesting to see a reissue of the old Mata Nui gang and find out just exactly how they hold up in a hero shooter environment. That's how you make something unique. You go and take a property like Bionicle that's been left in the dust for quite a while, and you revitalize it through a hero shooter. Now you've crossed the threshold out of toys and entered into video games that appeal to a much larger market. This will incentivize LEGO to join in and most likely cut down on the licensing cost. That's for free, Firewalk. You can use that for free. You don't even have to credit me. You don't even have to put Cider, the bounding into comics guy. You don't even have to put that in the credits. I promise. Just reskin it with Bionicles and everybody will love it. But anyway, guys, until the next video, good luck out there.